The world waits with bated breath for the Islamic Republic of Iran to respond to the latest aggression by Netanyahu's colonial apartheid state that they call Israel. Some fools argue that Iran should not respond, even more absurdly describing as escalatory the option of an aggrieved party under international law to respond to attack upon itself. And the more the Israelis talk up the success of their attack, the more they make obvious that Iran must respond, not just to equalize the score. 3 Israeli attacks, 2 Iranian responses. 3-3 is the very least you could expect, but Israel has already declared its intention to attack Iran for a 4th time. So not only to equalize the score, but to deter Netanyahu from further attacks. It's not rocket science. You don't have to be Einstein to work it out. And these Western politicians who are putting the blame on Iran rather than on Netanyahu for the massive escalation taking place across the whole of the region are, of course, trying to deceive you. They are throwing sand in your eyes, trying to confuse the public about who's in the right and who's in the wrong on all of this. Israel has killed 180,000 Palestinians, most of them women and children, in a tiny dot on the map called the Gaza Strip. Israeli settlers, gangsters, are roaming throughout the West Bank, setting fire to people and property, seizing land, ethnically cleansing the local Palestinian population from the West Bank of the River Jordan. And of course, although it isn't going so well for them, Israel has escalated by invading Lebanon. I say invading, but they haven't actually advanced more than a couple of kilometers. They hold nothing in the way of towns or villages inside Lebanon. They are being fought to a standstill by an irregular force, by the Lebanese resistance, whose leaders were all slain in advance of the Israeli invasion, thinking that headless the men of Hezbollah would be powerless, but they know better now. In the London Times this week, in the London Times, an Israeli army officer described the people that they were fighting against, the Hezbollah, as the best of the best, as the cream of the cream. They know now that since 2006, when Hezbollah last gave Israel a beating, that Hezbollah is even more powerful now, perhaps 10 times more powerful now, with definitely more than 10 times in the way of war material. And so a kind of stalemate exists on the ground in the south of Lebanon, which in time-honored fashion, Netanyahu seeks to rebalance by slaughtering women and children in other areas from the air. The bombardment of churches and mosques, the bombardment of ancient treasures of human civilization, like Baalbek, like Tyre or Sur, as it's known in Lebanon. The destruction of ruins that are thousands of years, the patrimony, the treasure of humanity. That's all that Netanyahu's forces are good for. Slaughtering women and children, destroying antiquity and human history and achievement. But we wait now for Iran's third response. And who better to talk about it than my guest this evening on Have It Out with Galloway. Professor Seyed Mohammad Marandi is the Dean of the American Studies and the Study of Orientalism at the University of Tehran. He has become, over the last period, one of the most listened to and sought after voices to explain the situation as it looks from Tehran. I myself have interviewed him many times, and his audience grows and grows. He's a distinguished professor. If I may say so, he's an even better political analyst, and we are lucky to have him with us now on Have It Out with Galloway. Professor, thank you for joining me again. We are waiting with bated breath. The American public are used to October surprises. Are they going to get a November surprise before polling tomorrow?
Well, George, it's always an honor being with you. Thank you very much for inviting me. I really don't know. These are very interesting times. It is possible that something will happen tonight. If it doesn't, that means that the Iranians want to wait until the American elections are over, I think. That would be my interpretation, that if it doesn't happen tonight, then it's intentionally been put off until after the US elections. But what is, I think, very clear is that the Iranian response is going to be different from what we had before. The first strike was a warning shot. The second wave was a slap in the face. But this time round, I think it is going to be devastating. I think they are going to seriously punish the Israeli regime to make it rethink its wars and its genocide and escalation. And I think the Iranians have also warned the Americans that it is prepared for any scenario, which means that Iran is prepared for the United States to get involved. And if that does happen, then all US bases in the region, in the Persian Gulf region in particular, and in Iraq, they will be swept away. But more importantly, I think all of those oil and gas installations in the Persian Gulf will be destroyed. I don't think it's even necessary for the Iranians to close the Strait of Hormuz, because if the assets of these small, tiny regimes in the Persian Gulf, these family dictatorships, if they're destroyed, then there's no need to close the Strait of Hormuz.
Now, you talk about these principalities. The Americans have their heaviest strategic bombers sitting on the tarmac of their largest military base in the world, 200 kilometers from you, in the Principality of Qatar. This is in itself a provocation, is it not?
Absolutely. But these bases, as you rightly point out, are very close to Iranian territory. Iran does not need the longer range missiles that have been used to strike the Israeli regime. It can use shorter range missiles, and Iran has many of those. And they can reach any country or any small state in the Persian Gulf region in a very short period of time, much shorter than what we've seen with Palestine. So it would be very foolish for the Americans to try to escalate, because it will effectively bring down the global economy in a way in which I think the world will not recover for perhaps decades to come. I think the Americans know this. The Iranians obviously don't want an escalation. They don't want a regional war, because it would be catastrophic for the world. But The United States has so far allowed the Israeli regime, and so have the Europeans, the Canadians, the Australians, the British, New Zealand, all of them, have allowed the Israeli regime to do anything it wants. It's wiping out the Palestinian population in northern Gaza as we speak. There's a starvation siege, and it's happening right before our eyes. But the BBC, CNN, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, they pretend as if there is no starvation siege. And so when the collective West, the political establishment, including diplomats, journalists, and the elites and think tanks and regime officials, when they allow the Israeli regime to do whatever it wants to the Palestinian people and now the people of Lebanon, that means the Iranians have to be prepared for any possible escalation by the Americans.
Now, these little states in the Persian Gulf all say that they don't want their land, their air, their waters to be used in any attack on Iran. And maybe they're sincere or not. But when you give away your sovereignty to a foreign power, when that foreign power is able to build its very biggest bases, then you are no longer, of course, in control of events. The emirs of these little states could ask the Americans not to, but the Americans can say, what did you think we brought all these weapons to this region for? So it would make no difference to Iran's reaction to that, would it?
You're absolutely correct. These little states, they can protest, but ultimately it'll be the United States that makes the decision. But that is exactly why the Iranians have built so many underground missile and drone bases across the country. Literally every city in Iran has an underground base near it. So the Iranians can fire hundreds of thousands of drones and missiles and destroy everything. And again, it's not something that can be repaired in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. If the infrastructure of these regimes collapse, the regimes will collapse. There will be nothing left because the only thing that these mini states have in the Persian Gulf region is oil or gas. They don't have anything else. They're not like Iran, or they're not like many other countries which have agriculture or industry or a diverse economy. So they will be gone. And the American economy will collapse. European economies will collapse. And I think it's quite clear that the most vulnerable economies are Western economies because they have the most to lose as a result of such circumstances. So the choice is really, it has to be made in Washington. These family dictatorships, they can complain, they can nag, but they don't have sovereignty. And they cannot complain to Iran because if the Americans strike Iran, those bases are in their countries. They have to be answerable to the Iranian people. And if we see an existential threat, obviously the Iranians are going to go offensive and they're going to hit as hard as they can. And these underground bases are not bases that the Americans can destroy. They're deep underground. They have been made for a potential American invasion of Iran since before the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan. But after the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, the Iranians began to develop these underground bases. They began to develop their drone technology, their missile technology, and also, as we've seen, their anti-aircraft defense capabilities. So it's this is not a war that anyone can win. There is a balance of terror that has been established between Iran and the United States. And the Americans, they cannot win. But again, when the collective West allows a Holocaust to be carried out in front of our eyes, then really we cannot make any 100% foolproof predictions.
Quite so. On the subject of sovereignty, before we turn to the US, what do you make of the conduct of the American ambassador in Lebanon? She seems to imagine that, like Victoria Nuland in Kiev before, she has plenipotentiary powers, that she can order the Lebanese government to do this, do that, not do this, not do that, what they can, who they can allow on their flights, on their national airline, who can be in their government, who can't. It is an extraordinary display of American power going on in Beirut at the moment.
And this is exactly why Hezbollah has weapons, because the pro-American faction, such as the Lebanese forces, and the Lebanese forces are the same militia group that when the Israelis invaded Lebanon in 1982, before Hezbollah was created, they were allied to the Israeli regime, and they carried out the massacre in the Sabra Shatila Palestinian camp, refugee camp, where roughly 4,000 people were slaughtered in 36 hours. So this militia, which is aligned to the United States, they, on the one hand, they want to carry out a coup right now in Lebanon. They want to, with the support of the United States, they want to create instability and a civil war. But as I was saying, the very reason why the Hezbollah has weapons is because the United States does not allow the Lebanese state to be sovereign. It doesn't allow the Lebanese state to be independent. Right now, the Israeli regime constantly bombs cities across Lebanon. It's bombing villages and towns. It's focusing on civilian targets in order to impose misery on the people. Of course, these are all crimes against humanity, but Western media pretends that it's otherwise. So they keep saying Hezbollah targets or Hezbollah strongholds to make their audience believe that these are not civilian targets. But since Western journalists, unlike in Gaza, they're based in Beirut, they know that the Israelis are targeting civilians. But the Lebanese government does not have anti-aircraft capabilities. They don't have surface-to-air missiles. They don't have an air force because the Americans won't allow it. So this is exactly the justification for Hezbollah having weapons. As I said, in 1982, when they invaded, the country had no defenses. The militias that were carrying out genocide on behalf of Israel are still there and aligned to the United States. So the resistance has to be able to defend itself and to be able to defend the people of Lebanon. The ambassador, as you rightly pointed out, dictates whether Iraqi aid can go to Lebanon. They say, no, you can't send it to Lebanon. You have to send it to Jordan. We have to see what's in the aid first. The Americans determine who gets on a civilian aircraft and who doesn't. So when you see a situation like this, I think it's clear that Hezbollah would be absolutely foolish not to be well armed and prepared for war, both against the Israeli regime, but also against its proxies.
Now, the United States election is upon us. It may be some days or may not before we know the full result. These things, when they're close, have a tendency to end up in the Supreme Court and so on. But the fact that in the closing days of the campaign, both Harris and Trump were having to respond to anti-war feeling in the United States amongst the people. Trump saying he wanted to come to Tehran and negotiate peace for the Middle East. Harris saying she'll do everything in her power to stop the war in Gaza, even though she's actually in power and has not stopped the war in Gaza. Nonetheless, the fact that both these antagonists feel forced to say this indicates that war, the dangers of it, and the cost of it are now domestic political considerations in the United States, perhaps for the first time.
Absolutely. But I would add to that it is an awakening among the American people, especially the youth. You see young Jews, Muslims, Christians, and people from other faiths and walks of life. They are now fully opposed to the war. And people today know a lot more about Palestine and the history of Palestine than they did a year ago, because young people have been doing their research, but they've been looking at the horrific scenes of genocide that are taking place 24 hours a day, and questions are raised. So despite the fact that the United States is not a democracy, there is no independent media, the corporate or legacy media is basically giving the Israeli narrative in different ways and forms, but young people, despite big tech also being completely biased towards the Israeli regime, they've seen the truth. And this is where the pressure is being put on the regime in Washington. So there are elites who understand the dangers of another war. They know that the US economy is in bad shape. They know that they're losing in Ukraine. They know that China, despite its difficulties, it's not waging any wars and it's busy dealing with its own affairs and its economy is growing. So the United States is not in a position to engage in a major war with Iran. Iran is not Iraq. And this is not 2003. The United States is a declining power. The global majority is much stronger today, and Iran is much stronger. And I should add that if there is a war between Iran and the United States, the resistance in Iraq will go to war with the United States. And the United States will lose everything in Iraq as well. And the resistance in Yemen will deal with those regimes that are with the United States as well. This is a war that the Americans will lose. So they are having grave difficulties, on the one hand at home, trying to convince their population that a genocide is not a genocide, a Holocaust is not a Holocaust. And on the other hand, I'm sure they are talking among themselves and saying, if we go to war, everything in the United States will change. Imagine if the price of gasoline, or if, let's just say, a barrel of oil goes to $400 a barrel. It's roughly 70 or so right now. What would that mean for the US economy? That means everything stops. And then it just doesn't stop in the United States and Europe, it stops across the world. You will have tens of millions of people on the move in Latin America, in Africa, far greater than today, at a time when the economies collapse in the West. It would be a scenario which I cannot even contemplate. It's beyond my imagination. And I'm sure there are sane people in Washington, sinister but sane, who recognize this.
Sinister but sane. Let that be the postscript of our interview. I know you are in very great demand, and so your time is very valuable, and I'm glad you gave some of it for us for that peerless tour of the horizon. Professor Seyed Mohammad Marandi, the Dean of Communications across the English-speaking world these days, the go-to man, and we got him here on Have It Out with Galloway. Let's go to the first caller to New York, where Melvin Wesche. I'm sorry, Melvin, if I have mispronounced your surname. What would you like to talk about?
First of all, it's very nice to speak to you again, George. I've called you on the other show many a times. And it's wishy, but that's fine. So as far as it comes with what I was going to say, this is kind of throwing me, but my belief in a lot of this is that most people nowadays in the United States, if they do understand what's going on, it's basically they're turning the other eye, the other cheek, going, I don't want to talk about it, or I don't want to speak about it, because they like believing that they're the heroes. They have that hero mentality. So when it comes to the war in Gaza, if you tell them, well, you guys are the bad guys, they're most likely going to look at people like me and you, and they're going to go and try to tone it out. They ignore things like Jews for Peace, which actually is censored. lots of communities like that. There's got to be a way to get these people to acknowledge this enough to where they're willing to do something. And I don't know how to do that, and I was wondering if you did.
Well, this is the way. The fact that we are making our own media, which is seeking to bypass the lamestream media, and in many cases, knocking their socks off in terms of audience share. I am currently talking to, at minimum, 5 million people a week. 5 million. That knocks into a cocked hat the audiences enjoyed by the legacy media. People much bigger than me, people like Tucker Carlson, increasingly querulous voices, asking difficult questions of the elite, are racking up audiences in the tens of millions, scores of millions in many cases. We have to find trusted sources and share them. We have to find trusted sources, share them, and invite others to the party, invite others to the places where they're going to find the truth rather than the lies of the mainstream media. That is all we can do, but it's working. Alistair Chambers is in the hapless city of Valencia in Spain, where this week both the King and the Prime Minister were run out of town. Alistair, most welcome.
How are you doing, George? You okay?
Yes, good. Sorry for the good people of Valencia, I must say.
Yeah, it's devastating here. Do you want me to quickly just give you a very quick look around?
Yes.
What's going on here?
Do. Yes, please
well,
do.
I'll just turn the camera around 2 seconds. So this is a school makeshift humanitarian aid depot. But if you just come out to the street just outside the school, you'll just see one of what is many cars that have been devastated.
Yeah.
You can see here the vehicle's just basically been flipped over by the power of the water.
Hundreds of people were killed in Spain. It's almost impossible to believe.
It's terrible. You've got cars being dragged off the street. It's a lot worse than you see in the media. It's a lot worse. This is just cars just from one street here that have been sort of macerated and turned over. Everyone's come over here. You've got people from all over Spain helping out, from Madrid, Catalonia, Ibiza. Everyone's here. But these cars here are just cars from the street here that have just flipped over and been smashed to pieces. It really is. It's frightening. But you can just see this little figure of hope here, the red bin, shape of a heart.
Yeah. Well, our heart goes out to the good people of Valencia. It is something when a highly developed country like Spain can be so devastated in one of its major cities. Please tell us what it was you wanted to raise.
What I want to raise is there's a lot of talk in the UK of support and help, and it's great to see people going out flying the flag and of the different sort of protests they want to make. But in reality, there's nothing more powerful than coming out here and helping people, whether that's in Palestine, Ukraine, wherever your heart may be. I'd say there's nothing more rewarding in life than just to come out, grab that flight, give it a go, come out. There's always something you can do and help people. Today I've just been bottling up waters, packing up bags. And sometimes it just takes 5 minutes to book that flight, get off your settee, go out there, live life, help people. And I'll tell you what, it's the best feeling ever. So anyone out there that's just thinking, if they want to do something, they want to make that little bit of change, give it a go. Don't hold back. Get out there, get off your settee, get on that plane and do what you can, help where you can. There's loads of things you can do around the world. And it really, really is very special when people come together and do that. So that's just what I want to say. A bit of positivity.
Be the change that you want to see. That's what we always say. I myself led many caravans, convoys to Gaza, breaking the siege over and over and over again, seeing the joy in the people's faces, not at the material goods that we brought that were a drop in the ocean, but the evidence that we represented, that people thousands of miles away in countries whose governments were hostile to them actually cared about what was happening to them. Let's talk to Ahmed John, or John Ahmed, I'm not sure which, who is an ex-MP in London. My dear, I don't think you're an ex-MP, but I may be wrong. I was only back in briefly.
So basically, I've got a question, or like your input around. So I ran as an independent within the cities of London and Westminster on the platform of direct democracy. Because the problem is, the reason that we see media and the government doing nothing is because they hold the power, and then nothing actually gets done, no matter how many times we protest, etc. And so my question to you, George, is what else can we do to try and tackle it?
I'm familiar with the direct democracy crew. You would have been better supporting our candidate, Hussein Shafi, who did very well in the cities of London, in the democracy such as it is that we actually have now, rather than some theoretical future. I have sympathy with the theoretical future that you envisaged. In the digital age, there are many things that could be directly decided by the public, and I would look forward to them very much. I'd love a referendum on whether we should continue to give billions of pounds forever to the regime in Kiev, for example. I'd love some direct democracy on whether the almost monolithic British parliamentary support for Netanyahu could be challenged. But the only way you're going to get a change in our democracy is by winning some power and influence in the democracy that we already have. By definition, the only people who could change the electoral system are the people who are elected by the current system, unless, of course, you were able to grow such a mass movement, you were able to force them. Stephen Carlton Woods in Manchester is next up. Stephen, welcome.
Right, focusing on the American elections, and it seems likely from sort of a lot of my sources that Donald Trump's highly likely going to win. Do you think he'll be gunning for all his enemies? And if he was in this situation, would you do the same thing?
Well, first of all, I think it's no longer highly likely that Donald Trump is going to win. There seems to have been something of a change. I would say that the election in the United States is now on a knife edge. And I believe that the Democrats robbed the American people in 2020, and they may be preparing to rob them again. That's the meaning of the apocalyptic language that they are using about the possibility of their defeat. If you say that the other side is literally an existential threat to the existence of the country, to the existence of a constitutional republic, if you portray your opponent as Hitler over and over and over again, if people are out trying to assassinate your chief opponent, this tells me that if they are that worried, then there is nothing that you can say they would not do in order to hang on to power. I don't actually want either Harris or Trump. But if it's got to be Harris or Trump, I'd rather it was Trump. Now, the swamp that Donald Trump said he would drain when he was last in office between 2016 and 2020, not only did he not drain it, he picked some of the worst reptiles out of that swamp and put them in his cabinet. people like John Bolton, who then were able to lead him by the nose into some of the greatest crimes of the century so far. So do I think he will come gunning for his enemies? Well, there are some of his enemies that definitely should be prosecuted by due process according to the law, including those who invented the gigantic lie that Russia was somehow responsible for Trump's first election back in 2016 and bent all of Western policy and much of Western law and the witch hunt of many people in the West on their bogus Russiagate fabrications. These people deserve to see their day in court, in my view. Up in Leeds in England, Orajput is the next caller. Owais, what would you like to say, my friend?
First of all, thank you very much, George, that you allowed me to speak with you. And I'm really impressed from your insight of various issues from local to global. So I have a question today that is from directly linked with our foreign affairs. You know, I started a petition to have Hamas de-proscribed as a terrorist group. I don't believe they are terrorists. They are the freedom fighters resisting an illegal occupation. Even the ICJ have said there is plausible cause of genocide in Gaza and ruled the illegal settlements violate international law. Israel oppressed the Palestinians for decades, committing war crimes, which is why Hamas set up, and they are an elected government, and most governments do not see them as a terrorist. My question to you, what is your views on this? And is a big issue, is global, local to global, local communities within UK. They have worried and they are actually answerless, and they're looking at you, how we can handle this situation.
Well, I don't think this is the right time for that petition. It's a forlorn hope. You won't get many people to sign it. And even if you did, it wouldn't make any difference. I'm not a supporter of Hamas. I never have been a supporter of Hamas. I'm not a supporter of their political line, of their methodology, their approach to the question of Palestine. I'm an Arafat man and therefore a supporter of Palestine's Nelson Mandela, Marwan al-Barghouti, who's been in prison now in Israel for more than 20 years and who was recently savagely assaulted by the guards, a man who one day I hope they'll have to negotiate with. But you're right to say that the Palestinian people's right to resist the illegal occupation of their country is absolute. This is absolutely clear, written in law. It is, people keep saying, Piers Morgan and the rest, Israel has the right to defend itself. It is explicit in international law that no regime that illegally occupies other people's territory has the right to defend itself against violence emanating from the people and land that it has occupied. So Hamas are not requiring your support or mine. Our views on them, though different, are equally meaningless. The only thing that matters is whether or not the Palestinian people support this or that party or organization. The only thing that matters is whether the population has the right freely to choose who they want to be their leaders. And they don't. It's a high time, long past time, that the Palestinian people had the ability to vote in a free and fair election. It's coming up for 20 years since they last had that possibility. The president's mandate has run out. The government's mandate, the parliament's mandate, Hamas's mandate, they've all run out. But we can't have a free and fair election when there's all-out genocidal war being waged against the Palestinian people. So Western critics who decry this party or that party in the Palestinian arena have really no leg to stand on, because it's the genocidal regime of Netanyahu that they have supported to the nth degree, who make it impossible for the Palestinian people to make a free choice in a proper democratic election. Now, let me go to Manila. My goodness, where Warren Thornton is. Warren, you're in the Philippines. My goodness, go ahead.
Hello, George. I had a meeting the other day with a Chinese attaché, and he was telling me that the Americans had approached them asking about the ties between Russia and North Korea, and were they worried about that? And the Chinese turned around and said that it was no concern of theirs. And then they were asked about the possibility of them having to strike into North Korea to protect South Korea, given that they've also come out with the absolute nonsense that the North Koreans are in Ukraine, and there's no evidence for that whatsoever. What's your thoughts on what they're trying to do? Is it trying to start a war with North Korea, or is this just trying to get long-range weapons to strike at the so-called North Koreans that are deep inside Russia?
Well, that latter point is a very tantalizing hypothesis, and you may very well be right. It would be a cover for firing long-range NATO weapons deep inside of Russia, and you can claim your target was a North Korean. The whole specter of North Korea in Ukraine is a complete fabrication. First of all, Russia is not in need of anybody else's soldiers. The Russian armed forces are without number. They are numberless. The Russian people showed in the Second World War, and will show again, that they are ready to fight for their country, its sovereignty, its independence, and its unity. The idea that Putin has to go to North Korea for a few thousand Korean soldiers when the Russian army is knocking over almost on an hourly basis the fortresses of the Ukrainian armed forces and NATO, and liberating territory sometimes 10, 20, 30 kilometers at a time. The collapse of the Ukrainian front line does not seem to me to warrant bringing foreign forces in to the battle. But there are plenty of foreign forces already in the battle. The problem is they're all on the Ukrainian side. The entire Ukrainian war effort is based on foreign forces, foreign airplanes, foreign tanks, foreign guns, foreign shells, foreign bullets, and foreign soldiers. In the beginning, perhaps, mercenaries from Western countries, but increasingly, the suspicion is there that either immediately, previously demobilized actual regular forces from countries like the United States, or even people who are still in the services of the United States Armed Forces who are involved in the war. So, as the Bible says, ask not about the mote in your brother's eye. Ask instead about the beam within yours. But I'll tell you what, Donald Trump actually crossed into North Korea last time he was in power. You'll remember all that stuff about the little rocket man and so on, all the tough war talk from Trump. But actually, relations on the ground between the Americans and the North Korean government were never better than they were under Donald Trump. And I very much doubt if anyone in their right mind fancies a war with North Korea. I've been to North Korea, not once, but twice. And I can tell you that that is the last place in the whole world that you want to have a war with. Thanks from Manila, Warren. Let's go to London. Domenico De Leo in London. Domenico, what would you like to say?
Hello, George. Thank you for having me again. I wanted to ask a question with regards to the Channel 4 documentary about the royals. So considering the fact that mainstream is owned by power and the fact that the so-called royals are power in Britain, and also considering the fact that the best way to make sure that uncomfortable truths and facts go eventually unnoticed is to openly admit to them and talk about them, could the Channel 4 Dispatches documentary just be an ad hoc move to normalize and neutralize the simmering underground malcontent with regards to the so-called royals and the absurd setup of the monarchy here in the UK?
Well, I don't believe it's a conspiracy of any kind, if that's the implication of your question. I think the documentary is deeply unwelcome by the British establishment and by the royals themselves. Let's start calling things what they are, Domenico. These people are royals because their ancestors, at the point of a sword, took power by killing other people and stealing their property, and sometimes carrying off the women and marrying them, and thus dynasties are formed. The establishment became the establishment by a process of violence and theft. So let's not talk about them as if they were God given or anointed. The divine right of kings died a death a long, long, long time ago. Now, if the royal family were an Olympian vision of humanity, if they were people of unimpeachable character and the content of their lives were unimpeachable, I'd still be against a monarchy. A monarchy is the most ridiculous thing, an absurd thing in the 21st century. The idea that your head of state is the head of state only because they came from the loins of the previous head of state and going back generation after generation is inherently a stupid thing, a childlike thing. And so I support, and my party, the Workers' Party, fight for a referendum on the continuation of the monarchy in Britain. We said it before the demise of the previous monarch, Queen Elizabeth, and we say it before the demise of the current monarch, King Charles. We cannot go on like this where the public are kept out of the debate. Now, I believe the public are boiling mad at the idea that not only are we paying millions, scores of millions in the civil list to this dysfunctional, malfunctioning family, but that they, through their land holdings, including the seabed, the bottom of the sea, they own it, are taking rent from even the National Health Service in Britain. Even their own Royal Navy, the Royal Navy, is paying the royal rent for the sea and the seabed on which they operate. The greatest novel of the 20th century was Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. He had a character called Milo Minderbender. That's the kind of thing that he used to do. I commend it to you. Alas, we've run out of time. My apologies to those that didn't get in. Come back next week at the same time, same place, and we'll see if we can put you to the front of the queue. I've been George Galloway. This has been Have It Out with Galloway.